What kind of mic are you using? Just like your headphones or something?
No, I'm using this handset, which I really love.
Oh.
This old-fashioned, hold it against your head handset.
Got it. That's fun. So you're actually like sitting there as if we're having a conversation on a dial-up phone.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fun, actually. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Adventures Through the Mind. I am your host, as always, James W. Jesso. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can probably see that I'm in a fairly beautiful area with some mountains behind me. I'm here on some incredible private property in the Kootenays, British Columbia, Canada, and I just finished my experience at Inshallah Festival in southern Alberta. I got some dogs coming up here. Hey buddy. I'm recording a video. Yeah. So I just got back from Inshallah Festival in southern Alberta, which is a family festival. Really good experience for me make a really qualitative difference here between a kid-friendly festival and a family festival, where this was really about supporting families and still having a super good, playful time to some incredible music. And so that was their 10th year, and I believe they're taking a break after this for a year, which is sad because, wow, what an incredible festival, but also beautiful because it allows space for something new to emerge in the coming year. So if you're listening to this, I highly suggest searching Inshallah Festival, Inshala. Of course, that will be on my website. My next step from here is Camp, K-A-M-P, which starts in a couple days, depending on when you're watching this. And it's here in the Kootenays, and I'm really looking forward to that. Also a family festival. Over the last couple years, living back in my hometown, my origin city, and getting to really be a part of the life of my family and in a family life with my nephews and my sister and my parents, has really brought a sense of how much I enjoy being around kids and how much I enjoy being a responsive, caregiving adult in a larger community. Really appreciate that. So I'm looking forward to this upcoming festival too. There isn't very many announcements here before this episode begins, other than I am on tour teaching about inherited family trauma as a workshop called Healing the Past. I'm going to be recording it. I've already recorded my first talk of it. I haven't done this talk before. This is the first year, and I'll pick the best one, and I'll be releasing it not necessarily through the podcast, but through my website, jameswjesso.com. But if you want to check me out or even meet up with me in a city while I'm on tour, you can head to jameswjesso.com/events, and you'll be able to find out where I am and when, and maybe either just come to the event that I'll be at, or you can just send me a message, let me know that you live in that city, and maybe we can plan a tea or some sort of gathering. So definitely reach out. Contact details are also on the website. Some other stuff that you will find at jameswjesso.com includes all of my written work. If you're just tuning into the show for the first time, I got my start, I guess, in doing this podcast thing as an extension of my goal, I guess, to better the world by my creative action in my day-to-day life. And primarily that was writing, and then it became public speaking, and then it became this kind of mash of all of it in podcasting and interviewing people who inspire me, whose work inspires me, and who I feel that what they're doing in the world feels so nourishing and so supportive to the, just like the ongoing challenges of being alive and trying to make sense of this crazy thing called self-aware life. And so the podcast is an extension of these other things, which includes some written stuff and some videos that I shoot, sort of independent videos, which will be growing in the new year, the fall of this year when I'm back at home. And so please go over there and check that out. Beyond the podcast, you can check out my other work. And if it's your first time, please subscribe to the show and follow me. You can also hit up my newsletter, which is on the website, jameswjesso.com, to stay directly involved with what I'm doing and everything that I'm updating. And I give like some nice personal life updates there too, if you want to be directly involved in the life that I'm living, as I somehow blend my personal life with this whole social media professional life thing to, I guess, express myself and to share with you, hopefully in a way that benefits and inspires you. Moving into today's episode with Tobias Thon, we are going to talk about Kambô, actually. Interestingly enough, I'm on a drive. I caught a ride straight from Inshallah Festival here to the Kootenays, which is about 5 or 6 hours from southern Alberta here into inland BC, in the valley, southern inland BC. And one of the things that we talked about on this long drive, of course, you talk a lot when you meet a new person and you get into a ride together. And they asked me about Kambô, because I had mentioned that I knew some stuff about it. And it was already the episode that I was going to be recording the intro for today. So it seems like maybe perfect timing, and hopefully it's perfect timing for you if you're ever interested in the frog medicine, which is qualitatively different from the toad medicine, as you're going to hear. I got to say, Kambô was really important for me in my own journey with trauma recently, since my trauma was wrapped around the perception of losing control of my body and going into a high anxiety state and with the fear that I was about to die, because that's where the trauma kind of emerged from, a critical event that was best described as a medical emergency while being on ayahuasca in Peru. And so Kambô really, for me, had the sensation like, oh, I'm losing control and I'm dying. And going into that and consciously saying, yep, I'm going to have to face the unavoidable fear of death and the actual sensation that I'm dying, because that's kind of what it feels like for me, was really meaningful in choosing to cathartically work through that and have the courageousness to face it. I mean, it didn't fix things completely, but every small step, there is no magic bullet, for curing or healing trauma. It's a journey. Even when you're over the tipping point to health, it's still a journey. So I have a lot of deep reverence for Kambô and a lot of appreciation for the help that it offered me at the time that I need it. And of course, I'm never one to encourage anyone to take any type of psychoactive, especially Kambô, which is, as you'll hear, it's not the most enjoyable experience in any way. But I do want to say that it has been really meaningful, and maybe some of you out there will see that it's the thing that you've been looking for. And if it is the thing that you're looking for, I hope that it helps you through it, helps you through whatever you're going through. The final piece before this episode begins is that, of course, this podcast is brought to you by listeners like you. My financial model for living my life and doing things like this is to gift it, to give it my all and to give it out for free, and hope that people find resonance with what I'm offering and give back in return, entering a circle of reciprocity. And so if that's something that you feel like you would like to do, you'd like to support the podcast beyond just sharing it on social media, you can leave a donation by heading to jameswjesso.com/support, where you could do PayPal, Bitcoin, or Ethereum, and a really great way to support the podcast ongoingly and to help me build a solid foundation to continue producing this work, would be to head to my Patreon page, where you could just search James W. Jesso on Patreon, or again, jameswjesso.com/support will have all that information there for you to check it out. I do have some patrons that are already helping to support the show, and thank you so much to you for doing so, and thank you in advance to all the listeners who are going to be inspired in this moment to go and give back to the show and help this show continue to grow and help me to continue to invest into it spiritually, psychologically, emotionally, and of course financially. That's it. Please enjoy this interview with Tobias Thon from Berlin, Kambô practitioner. Welcome, Tobias Thon, to Adventures Through the Mind podcast. How are you doing today?
Hey, James. Thank you for having me. I'm good.
Mm-hmm. I'm looking forward to this conversation, as we were just talking about in the pre-interview prep roll. The idea of taking Kambô again has just recently come up in my life, the opportunity. So it's apt timing that we were able to connect this.
Wonderful.
So let's jump right in with obviously the biggest question that listeners who are totally unfamiliar with Kambo are going to have, which is, what is Kambo? And the story of Kambo in particular, I'm curious to start maybe with the mythic and traditional origins of the frog medicine as a way of honoring its lineage, and then leading up to sort of the more conventional modern look on what is Kambo.
Yeah, sure. I mean, the history of Kambo is, in a way, I would say it's somewhat of a mystery, like Kambo itself, because we don't really have much knowledge. There are not many Kambo scholars around, and as an indigenous medicine from the Amazon, there is not much written history. As we know, the Amazonian tribes, they have oral history, and things get murky if you go more than a century back. So I think all we know at this point is that Kambo as a treatment has been around for quite a while. And there are different myths about its origin, and they're actually, funny enough, they're contradictory. Kambo has been used by several tribes, is still being used by several tribes, and I think each tribe has its own myth about where they got it from. For example, the Katukina, they say, actually the Hunikun, they say that Ayahuasca told them. They have the story about Kombu, the shaman, whose tribe was sick, and then Ayahuasca told him to go into the rainforest and get the secretion from this frog and treat his people, and that's what he did. The Matzes, which are the tribe who supposedly work with Kambô the longest, they just say that the frog themselves told them. So there we already have two conflicting histories of how Kambô as a treatment came about, and maybe they're both right. I mean, who knows? It's totally plausible that several tribes came about across this method independently. But this is what we know so far based on, I would say, the scholarly work. And as I said, there are not many people who researched Kambô in this way. So we rely on mostly what Peter Gorman has found out as an anthropologist. And if you talk to more Kambô practitioners, you will find out that all of them are basically referring the same knowledge that goes back to very few people who did these trips into the Amazon 10, 20, 30 years ago and found out these specific things, but they might just be a small part of the bigger picture.
Mm-hmm. So then, what is Kambo? What is the frog medicine? What's it used for? And what is the experience like?
Kambo is a traditional treatment method from the Amazon, from the Brazilian, Peruvian Amazon. It's based on the secretion of the Kambô frog, the Philomedusa bicolor. It's a tree frog. And this secretion is being used subdermally. So basically, you take in the secretion through your lymphatic system, and it facilitates, I would say, an almost universal range of reactions and healing processes. And what Kambo does and what Kambo can do is so varied and comprehensive, and so also based on the individual person who works with it, that it's actually quite difficult to narrow it down. But there is this, the general notion is that Kambo is very cleansing, detoxifying, that it boosts your immune system, that it is anti-inflammatory, that it raises your mood, that it also purges negative emotions. And that is basically just the most essential, portfolio. But what I found is that Kambo really affects healing on a very deep and central level. So if you conceptualize disease as something that always has a deeper origin, then I would say that Kambo is somewhat able to penetrate deep and work on the origins of disease. I'm sure we will go into that topic deeper throughout the show, but the treatment itself takes, there are different ways to work with Kambo, very different ways, and I think that is also something that we'll talk about a bit more. There's, of course, the traditional way to work with it, which is Kambo is not a sacrament in the original Amazonian context. This will probably surprise some people because they are familiar with medicines like Ayahuasca, which is a very sacred thing that happens in a circle at night. And actually, Kambo is just being used like an everyday medicine without any big ceremony. And it's just something like when you feel sick, then the local shaman comes and slaps some Kambo on your arm, and then you will feel better after an hour. That's basically how they mostly work with it. And then a lot of the Kambo work that happens here in the West is more ceremonially. So people work in circles of maybe 8 to 10 people. So it's also kind of a group experience with a certain bonding aspect, I would say. And I, in turn, have come to work with it more therapeutically, which ironically is a bit more like they do it in the rainforest. Like I focus on one client at a time, and I do not do much of a ceremony, but rather try to make the actual treatment as effective as possible. Overall, it's the immediate process takes anything between 10, 15 to 45 minutes, depending on all the different factors. Because Kambo is also medicine that is hugely dependent on the environment and, of course, on the person who takes it. Because Kambo brings out the stuff that has to go, that people want to let go, to get whole again, to get healed. And that is, of course, very, very different with everyone. You might have one person who has a lot of toxins in his blood, maybe from chemotherapy. You might have another person who has a lot of emotional toxins, who is maybe traumatized and depressed, and this person will have a completely different process and a completely different experience. And these two persons will also have completely different experiences and processes every time they work with Kambo. Their first session might be entirely different than their second or their third. So this is why it is kind of difficult to narrow Kambo down, because it's so flexible. And also, this is also why people say it's an intelligent medicine. It just goes to work where it's most urgently needed, and then it just works from there on your individual healing path.
So, I'd like to maybe describe what the outside of a Kambo experience, what a Kambo experience looks like from the outside for people, again, who are totally unfamiliar. So if I were to sit in the room, and I want to get a little bit more into your specific process later, but if I were to sit in a room and watch a person receiving Kambo, what would I see happening?
So the preparation for Kambo is always drinking lots of water, because one of the main mechanisms that Kambo uses is purging through your stomach. And that can only work if you have drunk a lot of water, because the water is kind of like the vessel for the negative energies. And it's also how the liver is being detoxed. The liver, as we know, it filters and stores a lot of toxins in the body. Actually, also emotional toxins. The liver is associated with anger and frustration. So usually, when people start working with Kambo, the liver is the first thing that needs to be cleansed. And the liver is being cleansed through the stomach. So the Kambo process starts by drinking 2 liters of water, which for some people is actually the most uncomfortable thing about the whole treatment. Once that is done, you get your gates, which are tiny holes in your upper skin, They're being made with a red hot vine. And then the practitioner applies the frog secretion, and the dosage is quantified in dots. So for every gate on your skin, you will get 1 dot of frog secretion.
So just to be clear before you finish, by burned with a red hot ember on the end of a vine, we're talking for different terminology, like related terminology, something not too dissimilar to what might look like an incense stick in size that is burning, and it's pressed onto the skin and pressed away so that it burns and removes several of the first layers of skin, exposing fresh skin for the Kambô to be placed onto?
Yeah, actually some people use an incense stick. I use a vine. It's the traditional thing to use, but some people use an incense stick. That's also fine. And you just burn the epidermis. So the secretion does not go into the bloodstream. It goes into the lymphatic system, which is an important difference. Mm-hmm. And once the dots are applied, the number obviously makes the dosage of the medicine. And it's something that the practitioner usually intuits based on maybe like, are you male, are you female, do you have a strong constitution, or are you probably a bit more frail? So you start anywhere between 3 or maybe 7 dots. Like for Western people in the Amazon, they take up to 100 dots per session. But here in the West, we use the Kabocha Method, which is basically the westernized Kambô tradition. And there we start anywhere between 3 and 7 dots. And once these are applied, you can feel the energy of the frog secretion go through your whole body really quickly. It's a very strong, warm energy that rises up inside of you and goes up all the way into your head. Your heart beats faster, your blood pressure increases, you feel very, very warm. And from there on, it can already be very different, because for some people, they like immediately transition into a phase of actual bliss and just feeling completely energized. But usually with most people, because most people, at least at the beginning, they have a lot of stuff in the body that wants to get purged out, they feel like how stuff is gathering in their stomach. You can actually usually even if you would sit next to someone who receives a Kambô treatment, you would probably hear like some stomach noise that indicates that something is brewing there. And then after anywhere between 20 seconds and 10 minutes, people will start to purge. So they will basically spout out the water. It's not really vomiting. It's a different feeling. It's not such a cramped mechanism like vomiting. It's more like you just spout out the water in a pretty smooth way. And at this point, I would already see a little bit of what is happening there. If your bucket is very yellow, I know, okay, you have already some strong liver detox. If it's more reddish, brownish, it's the kidneys that are being detoxed. Sometimes it's just like clear water. Then the focus of that session is probably somewhere else. And that purging is what Kambô is most associated with. A lot of people think that Kambô is basically just that. You drink water and then you purge the water, and that's it. And in a way, it's true, because that's the primary mechanism, and a lot of people probably never move beyond that part. What also can happen is that you get diarrhea. Diarrhea is, of course, a cleansing mechanism for your lower intestines. And that is, I would say, something that happens in 30 to 40% of our sessions, at least in the beginning. You can usually relate it to, like, let's say, antibiotic usage or anything really where the lower intestines have residue that the frog wants to purge. So these two detox mechanisms are pretty central. Some other people might sweat, they might get swelling in the face, they might tremble. I even had someone once who just yawned throughout the session, because yawning is actually also kind of an energy release, and that was just what he needed. Like, he had some tensions in his body that he released through yawning. But the purging is, for most people, there's no way around it. And of course, it's unpleasant. And that is why Kambô has this reputation of being an ordeal medicine. Mm-hmm. And that is what you would see from the outside. And then you would see that someone at some point does his last final purge, and suddenly he's completely relieved and probably a bit tired, but already feels very well and has a shiny look in his face. And then the immediate process is over. That is like the bare minimum of what Kambô does. Especially in the sessions that I do, there is a much wider range of things that can happen, but we can probably go into that later. Mm-hmm. But that's the Kambô process in a nutshell.
Yeah, great. Definitely on the outside, like the most surface observation, it does seem to be something that is burned into the skin that causes people to throw up. But anyone who's been in the experience knows there's a lot more coming up around that. For myself, some of the biggest thing that comes up for me is just fear of giving in to suffering. And that's been a primary thing that's come up for me. And that dips into what you were talking about around it, really dialing into that sort of root, that source, the lack of better terminology, but the spiritual source of disease, which I'd like to talk to you about a bit more afterwards. As I know that I've read that traditionally it was used to treat what I believe is pronounced as penema, or like bad spirits or bad luck, or generally life sucks energy, which of course would explain why afterwards one can feel so blissed out. Yeah, and then there's also this evidence, like you mentioned, of it being highly anti-inflammatory and antimicrobial. And I've even read claims that it could work as a treatment for Parkinson's, cancer, depression, other diseases such as AIDS. I've read on web forums of people who, in the United States, who use small, frequent doses of Kambo as a replacement for HIV medication that they can't afford because it's the U.S. And that there's talk about it being due to the purgative effect and the detoxification of the liver, which you mentioned, in the intestines. But I'm curious what biomedical science has to say about this. Like, what do we know anything about the mechanisms of action behind why Kambo is creating the process that it's creating, and why it might have these reported medicinal benefits?
Yeah, I think Kambô is a tough nut for Western medicine to crack. Like, actually, many natural phenomena are a tough nut for Western science. There has been little research into Kambô as a holistic treatment. There has been some research into isolated peptides from the Kambô secretion. It's not my biggest area of interest and expertise, because I see Kambô as a spirit medicine that works as a holistic treatment, and actually even more than just a treatment, but more as a force that works on you. And there has been interest from Western medicine in Kambô since the 80s, 90s. There is at least one interesting pilot study about the effects of the demorphine peptide on cancer. I don't know how much this actually relates to Kambô, because it's something very different. If you extract like single peptide from the Kambô secretion and inject it into people, you will have an effect, and you will probably have a beneficial effect. But I feel it goes into a different territory. I mean, there's all the research that we have so far goes back to one person, an Italian called Vittorio Erspamer. He was a pioneer in several ways because he also discovered the serotonin neurotransmitter. And he found out that the Kambô secretion contains 9 different peptides, unique peptides that he named in certain ways that I don't know all from the top of my head. Mm-hmm. And he said about the Kambô secretion that the components in there are bioactive. So he made an important point about the Kambô secretion not being a poison or not acting as a poison. This is probably the most common misconception about Kambô. People think that it has to be a poison because it's a secretion that this animal puts out when it's threatened, so it's obviously a poison, and when people take it, they feel bad, so another reason why it's obviously a poison. But actually, when you work with Kambô more, you understand that it cannot be a poison in that sense. And Vittorio Erspamer found out that the peptides in Kambô are bioactive, which means that they trigger inherent physiological programs in the human body. They basically activate different healing programs, self-healing mechanisms. And he named 9 different peptides, which he relates to different, like one reduces pain, and one is anti-inflammatory, and there is another one that works more on gastrointestinal issues. I'm sure there is a lot of truth to that, and I think the Kambô secretion could potentially be used to derive prescription drugs from, but I highly doubt that anything along those lines could come anywhere close to the efficacy of the Kambô treatment. I know there's one pharma company, I think in Seattle, they have taken out a few more patents, I think 5 or 6, and they have some people working specifically on that, but even they have problems converting the peptides into, let's say, marketable pharmaceutical drugs. Of course, when I came across Kambô, I interpreted it in this, let's say, conventional way, mm-hmm. that is a poison, that it creates a certain reaction in the body, and that this reaction enables certain kind of healing. And bit by bit, the more I found out about it, I realized that this cannot be the whole truth. And this brought me to my current understanding of Kambô as a spirit medicine. So that is basically my angle on the whole thing. There is medical research. Supposedly some of it is promising, but I don't think that it will ever replace Kambô as a holistic treatment. And actually, Kambô brings up another, I wouldn't say misconception, but an odd way of conventional medicine to look at healing, because the purging mechanism that Kambô triggers is obviously, in a way, already a healing mechanism, because it's a way for the body to cleanse itself of toxins. But in conventional Western medicine, purging is an undesirable negative side effect. So any medicine based on Kambô that would make you purge, they would not consider acceptable, because that would be like a negative side effect. And there you already have it, that the way that Kambô lets your body clean itself already goes against the central paradigm of Western medicine, and that is that healing cannot be a drastic cathartic process. Mm-hmm. Kambô is a very drastic cathartic process. That is not something that would be tolerable for a prescription drug.
Mm-hmm. Certainly not. And it seems like your perspective as well, and I personally agree that the biomedical reductionist, physicalist perspective of, okay, so if we isolate down to what the active constituents are, then we can reliably say that the active constituents are what causes the desirable medical outcome. And so we can remove all the other stuff and just dial in specifically to this one or two molecules and fine tune it to our needs, which for sure might have some benefit in different places and certainly has had positive benefit in lots of places around the history of us as a civilization, being that we've really conquered a lot of infectious types of diseases and stuff. But the conventional medical model really does miss out on the recognition, like you said, of the importance of, say, the purging process, but also the importance of the sort of the psychospiritual source of disease. Even if we were to just reduce that down to a physicalist discussion, it's like if you were to say that, disease is at this point either an invasion of something into the body or a dysfunction of the body's normal physiological processes, causing, say, a heightened and extended stress response system, which would mean that you're responding to threat unnecessarily for a long period of time, which is typically something that's sourced in behavioral and past conditioning and past events, which is emotional, psychological, or even immune function, which can be associated to the same thing. That if we don't dip into that emotional, spiritual source of where the disease emerges from, either transcendently by just blasting through it and realizing it's all love and everything's okay anyways, or like you said, drastically and cathartically working that stuff out in some sort of ceremonial process, be it the Kambo medicine or the psychotherapeutic approach or something along those lines.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, from a holistic perspective, the whole concept of health and disease that Western medicine has is off, or you could even say they have it the wrong way around, because they perceive the body to be basically like a defective mechanism that always has to be kept up running through external intervention. And disease, they perceive to be just as an accident, while very often what Western medicine calls disease is just maybe a symptom, our body showing us something, trying to point us in a direction, or even our body trying to rid itself of something. Like it's very often what Western medicine calls disease is the attempt of the body to heal itself. And when you suppress disease, and it means you actually suppress the body's attempt to heal itself, then you have a problem. Just look at fever or coughing. These are both ways for the body to rid itself of disease, to relieve itself. And fever and coughing are both two symptoms that Western medicine tries to suppress or even categorizes as an illness in itself. Mm-hmm. So there are a lot of, if you work with Kambô and if you explore the paradigm of health and healing that Kambô opens up, you start to see a lot of the previously unquestioned or self-evident paradigms of Western medicine in a very new light.
And so is this perspective that we're talking about here, what you're sharing here, is this what you mean when in your bio you say that you take a more therapeutic than traditional approach and you advocate for, like you said, a holistic and deeply spiritual understanding of Kambo that goes beyond traditional indigenous cosmology and beyond the biomedical mechanism and physicalist explanation? Is what you're explaining, is this what you're talking about? And is there something that is really essentially part of your paradigm around working with Kambo that hasn't been explicitly clarified? And if so, could you kind of outline it now?
Yeah, what you just quoted refers to actually several different aspects of Kambô and also of my work specifically. When I say I work more therapeutically, this means that my work is focused on really using Kambô or working with Kambô to support an individual person through his or her individual healing path. So this means I provide the best possible space for deep healing. That is, for me, a very crucial term, because you can work with Kambô for detoxification, to boost your immune system, to work like on a, I wouldn't say superficial level, but on the level of well-being and resistance and resilience and like having more energy, being more alert. But you can also work with Kambô for deep healing. And that is, as I found, really a different domain. And it's also where you start to work on deep emotional issues. The traditional indigenous Kambo method is, in a way, I would say, rudimentary, and that is fine, because the people in the Amazonian rainforest, tribal people, if they don't happen to live next to, let's say, a gold mine or anything along those lines, if they're not victims of exploitation, they live a pretty serene life. Mm-hmm. They don't have anywhere as much toxin problems that we have. They don't have all this trauma that is associated with Western society. All the isolation and competition that we have in Western society creates lots of trauma. We know that. And the average person living in Western society has a completely different array of physical and emotional issues and problems than an indigenous person. And because Kambô tends to bring out what needs to come out, an indigenous person will have a much, let's say, more straightforward Kambô process. For them, it's basically a way to boost themselves before they go hunting. It's a way to fight malaria and snake bites. And if they end up being depressed for whatever reason, they will take Kambô and it will help them as well. But here, Western people, we have a completely different situation. Most people are full of toxins through synthetic additives in the food and all the toxins in our environment and prescription drugs and maybe recreative drugs, and then all the trauma that we have to endure in this inhumane society. So basically, when you work with Western people with Kambô, you open up a completely different a Pandora's box of a completely different size. Let's put it like that. And this is why the processes that Kambô can facilitate there are much, much deeper and much more complex. And they require a completely different setup. So deep healing needs a safe space. That is something that I found out that is very important. A lot of diseases or physical problems are really based on emotional issues, based on trauma, for example. And that is not something that you can really handle in a group context. And that is especially valid for women, because a lot of women have trauma related to men, for example. And this trauma will not come up in a group environment where they sit together with men that they probably don't even know. So healing is a lot about safety and also intimacy. So my therapeutic approach is also about creating this space. This is also why at this point in time I usually only work in one-on-one sessions. And then I really support people through the process, because when Kambô really digs deep, it brings you into a state of not of mind, but of emotion, where you can really break down. Sometimes people need to break down to release certain trauma. And then if nobody is there to hold the space for you, then this will not happen. So this is like at the core of my therapeutic approach. Work with people one-on-one in a very focused way, really find out what it is what they want to release or what they should release, and then guide them through the processes to several processes that all build on each other, and give them also the information they might maybe need about nutrition and everything else that kind of plays into this whole thing. And I found out that the depth that you can go down with Kambô is nearly unlimited. So you can work with Kambô on post-traumatic stress disorder, for example, because Kambô can bring out everything that is suppressed. And usually a lot of physical disease is a manifestation of suppressed trauma or suppressed negative emotions. And when you work with Kambô in an environment that facilitates the release of suppressed emotions, these emotions can go, which, of course, very often is a very strong, intense, and challenging process in itself. And once these emotions go, the disease can go as well, because the disease was probably a way of the body to either get rid of the emotions or to just give this person a hint, hey, there's something that you need to work on, that you need to notice, because it's actually still there, even though you have stopped to feel it. And that for me is, I would say that Kambô is primarily a medicine that works on the emotional level. Or let's say it's, for me, the biggest benefit, or where the real magic happens. And I work a lot with people who come with specific diseases, but the number one reason why they come, or the number one problem that they actually have, some of them without knowing it, is trauma. Depression, trauma. That is so often the core of so many issues where you would not even suspect it. It can be arthritis or neurodermitis or gastrointestinal diseases or cancer. Can all be related to emotional trauma. And Kambô can kind of open these channels for these emotions to come out and to be released.
Yeah, I'm totally on board with that. My personal experiences, my intuition and my research supports what you're saying there about the emotional source of disease. And I really liked what you said here about deep healing needs a safe space. I've tried Kambô now 4 times in 4 different environments. Once was in Peru, and it was really just, we all gathered around, everyone got their dot, and then we went out and sat on the boardwalk and had our purge, and it was just like a get hyped before we go into the jungle kind of thing. That coincidentally, I believe I was about to suffer greatly from food poisoning from eating something wrong a couple days or a day earlier, that after the Kambô, I spent the entire afternoon feeling absolutely horrible till I basically had the most intense shit of my life, and then I felt perfectly fine, which I attributed to Kambô, because I felt like I probably would have been out for 4 days with sickness had the Kambô not pushed it out. But I had this just like in the jungle, like give it a go, let's see what's up kind of experience. And then I had it again in Australia with a guy who goes by the alias, I believe, of like Pontius. That's his medicine name, and it was very ceremonial. Like songs were sung to the Kambô, and an altar was set up, and a picture of the frog was there, and I was able. I did 1 point, and in this one I did 6. And I was really able to go in, but I didn't really have that. It could open deep healing kind of mindset. And so it was totally in a physicalist place for me, that I was just purging it. And because of that, I believe some of the deeper work didn't come up, but it did have a positive impact in my life, which led me to doing it again. A few months later, just with my homie in his bathroom. At that point I did 5 points. He did 6, I believe. I sat for him, he sat for me, and then we got super hyped up and had an amazing day. And that at that point I was like, okay, I had done a little bit of research, and it was about clearing. At that point I was like, clearing negative energies. Okay. And then by the time I sat with you, if you don't mind me sharing my process, in your space, do you mind?
No.
So when I sat with you, by that point, I had really come to understand that there was something much deeper that was happening. And at that time in my life, I was really still going through the sort of what felt like the chapter before the closing chapter on some near-death trauma that I had been suffering through for a few years previous. That came up very heavily in the space, as you probably were able to see in me, and I wasn't really able to see in myself. There was a deep, deep fear of letting go, of ultimately of dying. And I feel like I did really well to go as far I was able to go before I started asking to have the dots removed and all this stuff. But there was definitely something about your space that, even though I wasn't able to fully go there, that, there was a deep sense of security in going into that, the way that you held the space, that, I didn't even have to hold the bucket. You held the bucket for me. It was just, you were totally there to support me 100% in what I was going through. And that experience showed me how much more there was to Kambo. And it was also that experience that showed me that informed me not to take Kambo again the next time I had the opportunity, because it wasn't going to be in that safely held space. And I knew that if I was going to dip back in, I was going to go even deeper than before. And I didn't feel safe with the people to bring me to that place emotionally. I'm sure I felt that they could, keep me from passing out and choking on my own vomit. For sure, they could do that. But whether or not they could hold me as I broke down completely to come to terms with the deep sense of terror wrapped around my uncomfortable approach to the end of my life, not so much. So I really appreciated that safe space that you held. And this is kind of leaning into another question. Of course, you can address what I just said before we answer the question, which is about this deep healing. And so whenever I think about, I imagine anyone, you think about medicine from the jungle and deep healing, one of the first things that comes up is obviously ayahuasca, and then we would think about other psychedelic compounds or plants. Of course, Kambo is not psychedelic, but I'm curious what your thoughts are. Like, where does Kambo fit inside of the sort of larger sort of spiritual ecology of visionary plants and fungi? And I know that it's been mentioned as having a synergistic relationship with ayahuasca, which, given how intense ayahuasca is, I'm a little blown away that people would mix those things. And that specifically, when you and I had a session, you used hape as well, which is maybe you could explain a little bit about that too. So where does this fit inside of the larger spiritual ecology of visionary plants and fungi?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. Of course, it's a topic that we could talk about for hours. I feel that Kambô is very special and exceptional, even within that realm. First of all, because it's an animal spirit, an animal energy, and not a plant energy. The synergy between Kambô and ayahuasca, I'm not sure if you can actually speak about it like that. I would say Kambô is an ideal preparation for ayahuasca, because Kambô cleanses the body and the mind, and that's also something that usually ayahuasca would do. And the cleansing with ayahuasca is very unpleasant and takes very long. You probably know these stories, or you've made these experiences yourself, where you have had an ayahuasca session. It was just a night of terror and purging. So basically a night of emotional release. And Kambô is a very handy way to cleanse yourself beforehand and then start working with the medicine like ayahuasca on a higher level, because the plant does not have to clean you out, but it can just raise your frequency right away, so to say, without doing the dirty work that Kambô can otherwise do before. So in that sense, I feel it's an ideal combination. I have a critical perspective on ayahuasca right now for various different reasons. I feel it's a medicine that can easily be abused by an irresponsible shaman, and it is being abused a lot. I also feel it's a plant that in itself is a bit ambiguous. It can heal people, but it can also confuse and maybe even manipulate people, like other plants can as well. So I myself, I would say I owe a lot to my ayahuasca experiences, but I feel that the work that is done with ayahuasca at this point in time is not universally beneficial to people. So at this point, I would not steer people towards ayahuasca anymore. Still, of course, a medicine with amazing potential. They both come from the same territory. There are tribes who work with Kambô and with ayahuasca. I would say that the special thing about Kambô, about the frog, is that the frog really wants to bring people into their own power and into their clarity. Very often I've felt that ayahuasca kind of has this tendency to instrumentalize people to fight for the rainforest, which is a very noble thing, but it's probably not the highest purpose of every person on earth. And ayahuasca has this tendency to steer people into a certain direction that I feel might not always be their direction in the first place. And Kambô is just, for me, ultimately, to put it in one word, purification. Kambô cleanses you from everything that is not you. And this is also like the paradigm that Kambô brings you to, that in the end, or especially in the beginning, we are all perfect the way we are. We are born perfect, in perfect health, and everything that we suffer from is something that came from the outside. And if everything that we are burdened with in terms of external energies, trauma, whatever, if this is taken from us, then we find back to our original purity. And this is also our original strength, our original clarity, and this will also allow us to find our original purpose. I feel that Kambô is very benign and very altruistic and just helps you to uncover your true self. It basically like digs you out of all that dirt that you might be buried under after so and so many decades of your current life. With ayahuasca, I would say it's much more complex. Ayahuasca can give amazing healing as well, no doubt about that, but it's not so straightforward, and it depends so much on the context and on the shaman that you work with. And I think that plants in general, animals are closer to humans, if that makes sense. So I feel that the frog and the human, they bond in a more natural way. Plants are amazing and they have amazing healing power, but I feel they are always a bit alien, especially if you connect with them on a mental level like you do with ayahuasca. And I think you would agree that the same goes for fungi. I mean, fungi even have a certain extraterrestrial quality, I would say. They are very benign, they are very humorous, but they're also clearly non-human, which is something that can really widen your perspective, but it can also be something that really confuses you. So I feel that the frog just strips away everything that is unnecessary and limiting and that drags you down. And for me, it's this purity and straightforwardness of Kambô that makes it such an amazing healing agent. It just goes where it needs to go, drills down as deep as possible, takes out as much trash as possible at that given point in time, and that's it. And that happens within 1 hour, reliably. And that is, I think, also why some people say ayahuasca is the teacher and Kambô is the healer. Because, of course, through ayahuasca, you can get a lot of interesting perspective. Like you can make these visionary journeys, and you might see things and planes and dimensions that you had no idea about, and they can help you a lot, can maybe also confuse you, but certainly they will widen your perspective. And the healing is kind of a side effect. And with Kambô, I feel it's the other way around. Kambô is a healer, a purifier. And on the way, Kambô also gives you some insights, some understandings, but in a very gentle way. Just like little presents lying along the way, I would say.
Mm-hmm. I definitely felt that the insights that I garnered about my trauma and what I was letting go and what I was facing in Kambo always seemed to be pieces that I was able to glean after the fact. It wasn't like I was being forced, like, all right, learn this now. It was more like, here we are, we're doing the thing, just do your best here, like just go through the process as best you can, and then afterwards it's like the sense of levity that it has offered me enabled a sense of being able to go back and unpack what it was that happened there to grab a deeper understanding of why it is that I feel so much better.
Actually, there's an interesting thing that a friend of mine told me about a few weeks ago that really made me think along those lines as well, because he did an ayahuasca dieta in the Amazon, and he told me that the shamans told him that when you do an ayahuasca dieta, meaning when you drink ayahuasca for 7 days in a row or more, that there is that the plant creates like a corona of energy around your head. This is like the manifestation of the deep connection that you engage with the plant. And of course, this energetic corona around your head is also it's an influence, a permanent mental influence on you. And he said that the shamans disadvise from taking Kambô because Kambô removes this corona, this energetic corona that the plant installs. And I thought, okay, there you go. This shows how Kambô always wants to purify you from any external influence, how the plant kind of entangles you, maybe even in a benign way, but it's still something that is not you. And when you let the frog do the work, you'll just plain take off the corona, throw it away. I think that is really a very nice illustration of the difference.
Yeah, I definitely feel this sense of almost like the turbulence of the Kambo is shaking the etch and sketch. You know, that little etch and sketch,
yeah.
Right? It's like shaking the etch and sketch. Actually, my experience in Australia, the person that I did it with, he felt like his specialty was holding a space for addiction treatment with Kambô, and I had actually found myself for 4 months after Kambô, 3 months after Kambô, not touching nicotine at all, which going in, I was like, I need to let go of whatever it is that's holding me back here. And I felt like it was addiction to nicotine. And I traveled even all through Thailand and everything. And it was just like all of a sudden my capacity to feel the nicotine or the tobacco calling me, trying to call me back, but my capacity to be like, no, I don't want that was just so much stronger. Like I was free of something. And, yeah, so my personal experience would validate that what you're talking about here, at least has happened for me.
Yeah, I mean, from a spiritual perspective, an addiction, for example, to tobacco is a connection with the spirit of tobacco, where the tobacco spirit does not have a benign perspective on you, and it forces you to indulge in it despite your will. And with Kambô, you can break this connection.
Yeah, I definitely have a different sort of paradigm around that, but I want to move into a couple different questions that are kind of dialing back a little bit. So the first question is something I wanted to ask before, but I just wanted to let the vibes of what we were talking about just flow because they were really juicy. But is there any contradictions or say things that people need to be aware of? For example, if somebody has like anaphylaxis, allergy to peanuts or bee stings, like is there any predispositions that would make Kambô like a physically dangerous practice or medicine for someone to approach?
Well, I mean, Kambô is an intelligent medicine, So when you get to know it a bit better, you realize that it always takes care to never push anyone beyond his or her boundaries, and that even the discomfort is always, there's always only so much discomfort. There's never more than someone can take. So Kambô, I would say, is, due to its intelligence, not a risky medicine at all, quite the opposite. But, of course, you should always err on the side of caution. And one thing that Kambô does is that it activates the adrenal stress axis. So blood pressure rises, heartbeat increases, and adrenaline increases. And for general reasons, you're supposed to exercise caution with people who have cardiac issues. Like if you have a weak heart, it's probably not a good idea to do strong Kambô work. Some people disadvise Kambô entirely for people with cardiac problems. Some people say you just start very low and work your way up from there. For general reasons, pregnant women are not supposed to work with Kambô. That is also something that the indigenous tribes stick to. They actually use Kambô as some kind of abortion medicine sometimes. Breastfeeding women should not take Kambô. That is, interestingly enough, something that the tribes don't stick with, but Western people do. And I think this is because Kambô ejects the toxins from the fatty tissue in the body. And I think that residual toxins might leak into the breast milk, which is, again, a problem that only Western people would have. So that is why for Western people it is disadvised to work with Kambô while breastfeeding. And that's basically about it. One big caveat that I found out about is that working with people who have psychotic issues with Kambô can be difficult and not very rewarding, especially for the person who facilitates and for people who are maybe sitting in, because the energies that are behind psychosis, if Kambô brings them to the surface, very strong reactions can occur. They're not per se dangerous, but they're probably beyond what most people want to experience. And this is why the only people that I have generally turned away so far from treatments were people where I noticed or sensed psychotic issues, like bipolar, borderline, suicidal, history of psychosis, everything in this domain. It is possible to work on it with Kambô, but for me it would not be the first and foremost medicine to use. Yeah.
So just kind of a follow-up to this question. Obviously, you're in Berlin, Germany, and it's possible for people, if they're going to be in that space, to connect with you, and because obviously you have a intelligent and experienced and wise mind around your practice. But most people who are listening are not going to be able to go to Berlin and do that. When you're meeting someone who's facilitating Kambô, say you're going for this deep healing, what should people watch for? Like how can I tell whether or not I'm going to be interacting with someone I can't trust? Like immediately I get the sense that anyone that's seriously working with Kambô is not going to do that. but because of the almost the qualitative differences you just brought up between Kambô and Ayahuasca, I definitely have seen that in the people who work with Kambô. But is there any signs or cautions that you would offer to people in finding a practitioner?
Yeah, I mean, of course, you can try and assess practitioners like through your mind. like trying to comprehend their level of qualification and their approach. But most importantly, and that's what I always tell people, is listen to your intuition, because you are led to Kambô by your intuition. And your intuition will tell you if someone is the right person for you. And this can actually be someone that your mind tells you is not even the right one. Maybe you're considering someone and your mind has certain objections, but you still feel, I want to do Kambô with this person. Then follow your intuition, because your intuition knows. There are many different ways to work with Kambô, and everybody has a different healing path. The fact that I work with Kambô in such a very focused, deep way does not mean that it is the right way for everyone. Because some people, for them, it makes more sense to make very gentle healing steps. For some people, it even might make more sense to work with Kambô in a group, because this group environment, this group experience in itself might be an additional healing factor for them. So it's important to free yourself from preconceptions and just feel into it. And of course, don't switch off your mind completely. Try to find out if someone is reasonably experienced, if he's conducting it at a space that is suitable, which should not be just a private living room where they just moved the sofa to the side, but a proper, clean, energetically clean, dedicated space. But your intuition will know, because in the end, and there we go into the spiritual aspect again, the frog will call you. The frog will call you when it's time. You might have an agreement with the frog to meet him at this or that point in your life. And when he calls you, he will make you find the right person. And then it's just about following your intuition, trusting your intuition. And your way with Kambô might be entirely different than anyone else's way with Kambô. I mean, my first Kambô experiences were not so great. My very first Kambô experience was in a big group of 15 people, no explanations, no support, barely a towel to sit on, and like from my current standards, barely acceptable. But still, it was my way to meet the frog for the first time, and everything started there and continued from there. And in hindsight, it was a valuable experience. And anything stronger than that, anything deeper or more effective or even less inconvenient than that would probably not have been the best thing for me at that time for certain reasons. So it's, in a way, try not to second guess what the universe like rolls out for you. Of course, experience is important. And one thing that we haven't really talked about yet, and one thing that I haven't mentioned yet, I mean, even though I work in a therapeutic paradigm, I still do shamanic work. Proper Kambô work is always shamanic work, because I work for the frog spirit. Its instrument in a way. I'm the eyes and ears and hands of the frog in any given session. And if there's one advice that I would give is make sure, feel into it whether the person who facilitates is really connected to the frog, or whether he just purchased a frog stick and offers treatments. And actually one important aspect is, do people charge money? Because if someone offers Kambô for free, he's probably not a professional. A shaman is not allowed to provide treatments for free, because then no energy exchange would happen. If a shaman facilitates healing for you, there has to be an energy exchange so that the debt is settled. So don't try to get healing for cheap or for nothing, because the more a healer charges, the more energy he or she will usually invest into the treatment, and the more healing that you will get. Of course, there are exceptions, and there are greedy shamans, for sure. With Kambô, probably not so much, but I still find it important to point out, don't settle for the cheapest offer with Kambô. Kambô is a potentially profoundly deep and life-changing process. You could call it soul surgery in a way. It's like in the same way that when you get heart surgery, you would not go for the
discount option,
for the doctor who charges the lowest rate. Maybe you would rather look for the doctors who can afford to charge the highest rate, because you want safety in that regard.
So that kind of enters into the second last question. I got two more. And it's actually from one of my patrons through Patreon, Abby, and he asked if there's any politics around in the field for Kambo.
Yeah, I mean, fortunately, not yet. Sorry that this will be a really boring answer, but there's not much politics around Kambo yet. I think mostly because in the West it is still widely unknown, and because it's also, I mean, Kambo is not psychoactive. It is in its effect nowhere near even to ayahuasca or visionary plants, or let alone psychoactive drugs. So it cannot raise much controversy in that regard. There are some politics in Brazil in that one tribe around a decade ago, the Catuquina, one tribe in Brazil, they kind of perceive Kambô to be their heritage and their, let's say, intellectual property. And they asked the Brazilian government to basically make sure that it cannot be misappropriated even by outsiders, by non-indigenous people in Brazil, which is why since about, I think, 2004, there's a ban in Brazil on Kambô outside of the rainforest, which is kind of crazy given that Kambô is a national treasure and in a way, of course, something that many, many people in Brazil would benefit from. And of course, there's kind of like an underground scene still going strong in Brazil. And I would also disagree with this notion of the Catuquina that Kambô is specifically their intellectual property, even if just for the reason that the Matses have worked with Kambô for much longer, and they are actually quite happy to facilitate that Kambô can spread, because the Matses, for example, they collect medicine, and I wouldn't say they export it, but they are willing to share it with non-indigenous shamans for, I think, reasons that are very benign. And in the end, we are all one, and the healing that Kambô can give, I think, is not supposed to be limited to just a certain tribe in the Amazon. But the Catuquina saw it that way, and I think concerns about biopiracy are, on the other hand, always justified. One big question is, of course, and has always been, what happens if, let's say, the wider world takes notice of the potential of Kambô? Because Kambô is so effective for most of the diseases that our society is plagued with these days. Just look at depression, for example, or chronic inflammation. If Kambô would come to the forefront of any wider discussion about healing, what would happen then? Would everyone run into the rainforest and try to catch some frogs or get some Kambô treatments from the local shaman? It would not be sustainable. So in that sense, Kambô has to stay within a certain sphere for the time being. But the sphere is growing slowly, organically, sustainably. And I think that is also because the frog has these things under control. The frog decides how far he spreads in the end.
So this last point that you brought up really ties into my last question, actually. So let's just assume we're able to provide Kambô en masse in a sustainable way. If that's the case, then if and maybe if not the case, then what do you see as like a reasonable future for Kambo within the modern world? Do you think it's going to expand outside of the spiritual containers that that we've been talking about, and expand out of the underground clinics and psychonaut bathrooms and into a commonplace within the westernized world, similar to what seems like the direction of ayahuasca and psilocybin right now? And where do you see its most effective place within that future modern world?
Yeah, I mean, funny enough, my work is probably already a symptom of Kambo spreading far beyond its original domain, because the way that my work has evolved, by now I would say about 30% of my clientele are middle-class elderly women. So a demographic of people who are not at all close to shamanism or even spirituality or alternative medicine, however you want to call it. So I feel that the paradigm that I'm working with is already something like a maybe neo-shamanism. I mean, it's a word with some negative connotations, but I work with Kambô in a way that specifically accommodates people who would probably otherwise not consider working with such a medicine. I make it easier for them. I make it easier to understand for them, easier to deal with the process. So at the same time, I feel there is a natural limit in how far Kambô can grow, because Kambô takes courage in the end. Because Kambô brings you to the core of yourself, and Kambô digs out the stuff that you're suppressing. And I've had a lot of encounters, of course, with people who have really difficult medical conditions, like multiple sclerosis, to give a good example, or cancer, where I know that Kambô could help them tremendously. And still, where after a short conversation, you realize these people are not open. No matter how bad their medical condition is, they will not consider something like Kambô, because for them it's weird, it's foreign, it challenges their preconceptions of medicine or healing or nature or the universe, or they're just not understanding why they have to go through an unpleasant process to heal. And if people are not ready or willing to go where the pain is, go where the fear is, then this kind of healing is not for them. So no matter, even if we would establish Kambô clinics, and if we would spread the word far and wide about Kambô and have lots of documentaries and maybe medical testimonies and whatnot, there will always be a lot of people who are not willing to go through this intense process. And that is okay, because even though Kambô is one of the most effective healing modalities, and I personally consider it to be the most effective, at least it's the most effective that I have come to know, it's not on everyone's personal healing path. Some people have a different path. Some people have a longer, slower path. Some people need their diseases to learn something. Some people don't even want to let go of their diseases because it puts them into a position that for some reason is convenient for them. So I think there is, of course, a fundamental conflict between what Kambô is and what it does and how it functions on the one hand, and the Western concept of health and disease on the other hand, not even mentioning the whole touchy subject of the pharma industry and the Western medical institutions who are not very open to yielding any of their power or authority or revenue sources. I mean, this is a whole different thing that we don't need to go into now. I am very positive about the future of Kambô because even in the short amount of time that I've worked with it professionally, I can see how it opens up and how more and more people come to Kambô who would previously probably never have considered something so unconventional or even weird, like putting frog secretion on your skin and purging violently, which is a weird notion.
Yeah.
Medical treatment.
Yeah, when you put it that way.
Yeah. So I think Kambô will continue to spread organically, and it will stay under the radar for a certain amount of time. Beyond that, I'm always generally excited to see if there will be some kind of breakthrough, maybe some VIP stories about Kambô, like you had with Ayahuasca, where people like Sting came back from the rainforest and said Ayahuasca is amazing and whatever. But I think even with Ayahuasca, it was apparent that it stayed below a certain level. I think there's so much inherent skepticism in Western society about anything that is unorthodox that it will take a lot to penetrate it. And if you consider how Kambô is applied, how Kambô treatment works in all its aspects, then it is immediately obvious that Kambô doesn't lend itself to double-blind medical studies. So for all those people who need like evidence, in parentheses, from double-blind medical studies, they probably have to wait a long time until they will get something about Kambô along those lines. Not even speaking of all these problems, like who would fund such a story, like such a study, you know? What are the interest groups that would help Kambô to emerge into the mainstream as a medical treatment? I think what Kambô also shows, especially if you work with it from a Western standpoint, is that it's our society that creates disease. It's our society that creates trauma. And would you expect a society that in a way is based on creating trauma and disease to really accept a true healing modality like Kambô into its mainstream? I mean, I hope it will happen as part of the wider transformation that is happening right now, but it will happen slowly, organically. So in the best possible way, basically.
Yeah, I mean, I feel uncomfortable when things sort of like escape the lab. I mean, for lack of better terminology, and become to be so abundant that you can't help but spill and make a mess when things just spiral out of control like that. So it would be nice to see Kambô not go the direction that many other things have gone, that has ultimately led to them being suppressed by the draconian overlords of the political social system, insofar as the sort of war on consciousness, as Graham Hancock calls it, but ultimately a war on maintaining a certain very slim bandwidth of what we are allowed to use to influence our body. So, and also, Tobias, I really appreciated this conversation today, and it's been really nice talking to you again. Can you offer any contact details for people who might want to get a hold of you, maybe come visit you in Berlin, or just want to check in with you? Yeah, sure. I mean, these days, most people come to Berlin once in a while, I feel. That's how we feel in Berlin, that the whole world is coming by at least once a year. My email is tobias@kambo.berlin. Very easy. And I'm always happy to meet for tea and just talk about health and healing and
shamanism and spirituality and all that with anyone who is interested.
Great. I will make sure that an opportunity for people to get a hold of that email will be in the show notes to the show. And thanks so much for your time again, Tobias.
Thank you, James. It was really nice speaking to you.
So I do look forward in the future for having Tobias on the show again so that we could chat a little bit more about the metaphysical underpinnings of his engagement with this medicine. But I hope that what you got there was meaningful and relevant, and that you enjoyed it. Of course, you can express your direct gratitude for enjoying the show by subscribing or sharing it on social media. I'm on social media at James W. Gesso, basically everywhere you can imagine, but primarily Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And Instagram is where I'm sharing my travels right now. As you can see on YouTube, I'm out in the middle of these beautiful Kootenai Mountains. And you can check me out there and follow my stuff and follow my journeys as I offer this whatever this is that I'm offering, creative work to hopefully better the world. And if you want to go beyond just following me and sharing on social media, a really great way to do that would be to offer a donation through PayPal or a cryptocurrency like Bitcoin or Ethereum, and also to become my patron on Patreon, which is how this show continues to have reliable funding. Because this is what I do. This is my work in the world, and I have this wide-eyed idea that I can continue to do it in a gifting model, and that people will give back in gratitude and reciprocity. And Patreon is a way that you could do that as a listener and become more than a listener, and a patron of the show and a patron of my work. So thank you in advance for doing that, and thank you to all the patrons that are already involved. You can learn more about it at jameswgesso.com/support, or just search James W. Gesso on Patreon. I wish you well until the next episode here of Adventures Through the Mind. Take care.